This is an open letter for friends and family. I was always fascinated on the question of why did communism didn't didn't work out and why did communism collapse. And because I never really bought into the idea that Reagan single-handedly brought down communism, and it was capitalism that brought down communism. No, I don't believe in that. It was if a system is sound, it will endure. If it doesn't endure, it means it wasn't sound to begin with. So recently, I've been, thinking. It seems to me that the same reason that brought down communism, it's probably going to bring down capitalism, and it's the same reason that to me it seems it's the same reason that a lot of monogamous marriages are disintegrate. And the reason seems to be, just in one word you can say, monopoly. The reason that communism collapsed, the reason that probably we're going to see the collapse of capitalism, and the reason a lot of monogamous marriages end up in a disintegrate, end up in a disaster, seems to be monopoly. Monopoly of supply, to be exact. In case of communism, we all know it's pretty straightforward. You have a case in which, from the very beginning, the system establishes different monopolies. From the very beginning, the system establishes different monopolies and comes up and says, okay, for example, revolution takes place, the Bolsheviks come in and say, okay, there are 5 bread makers that supply the bread that is, needed for this small city. There are 5, mid-size factories that produce bread. Okay, Mr. Factory owner, you're no longer the owner of the factory, but we want you to stay and manage the factory for us, the government. Okay, you do the same thing you used to do, continue making your bread, but this time you don't, charge the customers directly. The customers will give you a token and you give them a loaf of bread. At the end of the month, we will pay you. We, the government, will pay you for your cost and your wages of your workers. So you no longer own the factory, but you're just managing it for us, the government, and we pay you for that service. It seems fine. It seems it should work. But the problem is, right at the beginning, the government has chosen these 5 factories to produce the bread. In one word, you can say the government has given monopoly of bread production to these 5 factories. And as we know, in the communist system, you can't just get up one morning and say, okay, I'm going to start a small bread factory in my backyard, or expand it, or so over time you can expand it and make a bigger bread shop, and make a bigger bread shop, and maybe make a bread factory if you do things right. That's not an option in communism. In communism, the government builds, even if there is a need for another more bread, the government basically builds a bread factory, gives it to a manager to run it, and that's it. Now you have 6 bread factories. So it's not it's a top-down situation in government. So what the government does, and even in that case, there was a 5-member monopoly of providing bread to the town. And if there is more need for more bread, there is going to be a 6-member monopoly of, a cartel of bread for every small town. You can say cartel or a monopoly. A monopoly that is, has few members can be considered as a cartel. So communism, the problem that it doesn't work is that right off the bat, it turns everything into a monopoly. Everything. Shoemaker, cartel, or monopoly. There are certain members and they're all... What the problem with monopoly is that it's extremely inefficient. It becomes, over time, extremely inefficient. Because if you're the sole provider, if you and your 4 other buddies who are, in charge of providing a town with bread, if you guys are the sole providers of bread to the town, and nobody can, start a small business in his backyard supplying bread to the town because that's illegal. If you are the sole providers, you and your friends are the sole providers of bread to town with no competition, and you virtually have a monopoly. Now you would think that communism and monopoly, we have heard monopoly mostly in connection with the capitalist system. That's antitrust lawsuits and monopolies, and monopolies are bad. For God's sakes, you have a monopoly as a game in a capitalist system in which parents encourage their children to play it and learn it to understand how capitalism works. So we associate monopoly with capitalism, but the thing is, communism right off the bat starts a monopoly in each of sectors of the economy. Every sector of the economy becomes a monopoly in only a few hands. It's said that they don't actually own it, and the government is the real owner, and they're only managing it. The people in charge of those few, for example, bread factory, are only the managers, but the government actually is the owner. But the thing with that is that when monopolies are created, they become extremely inefficient. What I mean? Inefficient and corrupt. What I mean is those managers who are not owners and they're just managing a bread factory for the government, over time they use their position to put aside some money for themselves. That's corruption. And over time they become inefficient and lazy because they don't have any competition. So over time, in a capitalist system where a loaf of bread may cost $1, in a communist system, over time, a loaf of bread is going to cost $5 because the system becomes very inefficient because there is a monopoly. Everybody, it doesn't matter how fast you work or how slow you work or how much waste you have in your factory, how much unnecessary overtime has been calculated for the workers, how much the boss is taking home extra bread and selling it in the black market. It becomes it's a monopoly. There is no competition, and the government is as it is the government supervisor of these bread makers. He also gets into in the taking business, takes a little bribe, and signs off on high cost of bread production. So in the communist system, although the customers don't pay money directly for their bread, they just pay a token, but somebody's paying for this bread, and it usually ends up, it is the fact that the government pays for the bread. The people don't pay, but the government pays, and what the government ends up paying is going to be 5 times what it should be paying, because a lot of waste and a lot of inefficiencies have got involved into bread making business. And workers who don't show up for work, but they actually not only charge for their work but also charge extra time for overtime, and boss who steals, and monopolies. Nobody bothers when the system is running and is everybody is making money. Nobody really bothers to check, and there is no competition. Nobody bothers to check, and so the customers eventually, government pays, but eventually the whole population gets screwed, because they start, slowly they start with $1 for a loaf of bread, and they end up with $5 for a loaf of bread, because the factory is, slow and inefficient and corrupt and lazy. This is all we know, why communism doesn't work. But the main reason for why the system becomes lazy is because it gives monopoly to everybody. Now you look at capitalism and you see that the end stages of a capitalist system, it becomes very similar to communism. The government hasn't given anybody monopoly, but government also hasn't stopped monopolies from forming. It's been for many years now that we all have noticed that the justice system in the West, you can say France, England, Canada, United States, you can say a lot of these Western capitalist systems, the antitrust measures have stopped working. Nobody is preventing large mergers from taking place. Large mergers, small mergers. Nobody is bothered with preventing mergers taking place. And you end up with bigger and bigger corporations which provide, which have a bigger portion of the market in their control. For example, in United States, there are it's well-known fact that there are like only three poultry processors that provide the the chicken meat to 350 million people. It's not a monopoly yet, but it's a cartel. If you got three organizations provide the chicken for 350 million people, that's you can call that a communist system. You can call that, although the government hasn't given them the mandate that you own all of this, you take care of all the chicken meat of the whole country, but since the government, the system that is supposed to prevent monopolies from shaping, has taken a kickback and has stopped preventing monopolies from forming, you're going to end up with monopolies. You want it, like it or not, if you don't prevent it, you're going to get it. So eventually, let's assume this system continues. There are three now, and let's assume in 2 years there is going to be one. Let's assume. Apparently nobody bothers to prevent this system from this process from taking place, these mergers from taking place. Apparently nobody cares. So pretty soon you're going to have one. Imagine that you're going to have one corporation that is providing all the chicken meat, processes all the chicken for the whole 350 million United States population. I believe in England right now it's like 2 or 3, just like United States. That is communism. The communism is not how the government is formed, in my view. I might be wrong, but I don't think communism has nothing to do with elections or as far as I know, the communists also have some kind of an election. It's just, they pre-select the candidates and then people choose from the pre-selected. That's not what makes communism. Monopolies make communism unworkable. Make communism, monopolies that are government mandated, make the system prone to crash, unworkable. Well, when we know that the problem is with monopolies, that the monopolies start becoming inefficient and overpriced, and a lot of price gouging takes place, and too much profits and too much people, it is what is happening. That, for example, the chicken processors right now, their profits have gone up because they have raised prices, because supposedly they say it's because of inflation, but the chicken farmers are getting paid the same for their chicken. In fact, the beef farmers are getting paid less for their beef, for their cow, for their bull. So the producers, because they're not monopoly, they are small producers, they're getting screwed, and the customers are getting screwed. Exactly like communism. Government mandated communism, in which the customers are getting screwed and the producers are getting screwed, and this in the middle, the bread maker, due to inefficiencies and corruption and theft, is getting really rich. That's exactly what the poultry farm processors is happening to them, because they have a monopoly. If there were 15,000 poultry processors, if there were 5,000 poultry processors, that this wouldn't happen. They wouldn't be having so much excess profits, and the customers wouldn't be getting screwed because of higher prices, and the producers wouldn't be getting screwed because of lower prices. But the problem is with the processors, because they're making so much profit and they're blaming it on inflation. The problem is monopoly. The same problem that ruins communism is the same problem that ruins capitalism. Is ruining capitalism is the monopolies. You have this monopoly slowly over time. This is the thing with capitalism, that slowly over time monopolies form, and unless the government stops preventing these monopolies from forming, capitalism will eventually turn into communism, which means very few owners, managers, or whatever, very few are controlling very big processes, big organizations. They have monopolies, inefficiencies, laziness, corruption, excess profits, and high prices for consumers, and low prices for the producers. You have this problem in the United States in the car business, with car dealerships. There used to be, every car dealership was owned by a family or an individual or a family, or maybe a family owned a couple of car dealerships. Now there are corporations who own 200 car dealerships in 50 states. It's like there are like 10 corporations who own 90% of all car dealerships in all the states. You have, beef processors. There is like apparently 3 or 4 of them that process the beef that 350 million people consume. And then you go on and on and on, and you find out that the problem is that it has turned into monopolies. How monopolies are formed is, one is overregulation, in which the starting capital necessary to enter into the specific business is so high because of so much regulations that it costs money to put together the conditions that passes inspection to enter into a business. So that cost, when you raise that cost so high because of so much regulations or over regulations, very few people can start a slaughterhouse in the back in their backyard or in their small shop. Very few can start it, and even fewer can maintain it, because when you're dealing with monopolies have a lot of purchasing power, a lot of oomph. So one is overregulation. Why monopolies form? Overregulation and high price of entering into a business for the newcomers. So the old monopolies keep tight control over their monopoly. And second, the judiciary, the legislature is looking the other way. They're not preventing these mega mergers from taking place, and if they don't prevent it, these mergers will take place and monopolies will form, because monopolies is the most profitable form of business possible. So all businessmen strive to have a monopoly. You just need the government to prevent them from achieving their objective, which is having a monopoly. The government is looking the other way. The legislature and the judiciary and the executive, they're all looking the other way and allowing monopolies to form, or small cartels, which are no different than monopolies. I mean, if there are 5,000 poultry processors, they can't fix prices within 5,000 members. But if there are 3 poultry processors, they can fix prices over a golf game. The 3 of them, the 3 head honchos go play golf, and within a period of 9 holes or 18 holes, they set prices for everything. And nobody has to know. It's a cartel. And on the side note, this monopoly is exactly why monogamous marriages, many of them, disintegrate. Because the woman, who is the supplier of sex, I say the woman is a supplier because when men is always the consumer of sex, because men always want sex, and women sometimes do, sometimes don't. It depends on a lot of things. So you can in a sexual relationship between man and woman, you can always consider the man as the consumer and woman as a supplier. And the proof of that is that we know prostitution as the oldest profession in the world. So and for every 10,000 female prostitutes, you only find 1 male prostitute. So there is no question that women are the suppliers of sex and men are the purchasers or the consumers of sex. So in a marriage in which It's supposedly monogamous, and woman is the provider of sex, supplier of sex. Because there is a monopoly, because she's the sole supplier of sex by law and by tradition, it becomes, the system becomes inefficient, as usual, where monopolies go. What I mean by inefficient is that with a prostitute, you pay 20 bucks, 50 bucks, you have sex. Sex costs 50 bucks. With your wife, who you're in a monogamous relationship, it's gonna cost you a lot more than 50 bucks. It might be a $500 necklace, or it might be, from big to small, you're basically always in the business of pleasing the lady if you want sex. So you're a slave. And sometimes she needs big presents, and sometimes she needs small presents and gifts, and it's because she has a monopoly in providing sex to the man. And this monopoly means she can name her price. And many women, don't understand the concept, and they try to abuse the system. Sort of like they try to squeeze as much as they can out of this monopoly that they have, and they drive the man either to other women or to divorce, because they're abusing their monopoly. They're using their monopoly as much as they can, which means basically abusing their monopoly. And for that same reason, why these women are very sensitive towards promiscuity by men, very sensitive, and they don't want their men to sleep around, for the simple reason that they don't want to lose the monopoly. They don't want to lose the monopoly over their men, because as long as they have that monopoly, they can charge a lot for it. Physically, emotionally, financially, they can charge a lot for their pussy, as long as they have a monopoly over what pussy this man can consume. But once they lose that monopoly and the man has access to other pussy, she knows she no longer can charge as anything she wants for the pussy. She knows she cannot overcharge. Therefore, she's uncomfortable. She becomes uncomfortable, and she becomes very aggressive towards the other woman, towards the men, because they have broken her monopoly. Believe me, and anybody in business or as you can see in family, monopoly is a very addictive thing. Monopoly is a very addictive. Monopoly is very for the guy who has a monopoly, or a woman who has a monopoly over her husband. It's very profitable. It's very empowering. Nobody who has a monopoly in business or in anything else wants to give up monopoly easily, because it's very profitable. So in conclusion, the same reason communism doesn't work is formation of monopolies at the beginning. The reason capitalism will not work, is eventual formation of monopolies at the end. And the reason a lot of marriages monogamous marriages stop working is women starting to women have monopoly over provision of of sex to the partnership, provision of pussy to the partnership, and therefore they have a monopoly over that. Therefore many will start abusing their monopolistic position for more and more gains, which will eventually cause, a revolution such as a divorce, a revolution such as, or men sleeping around outside of marriage. Monopoly. Most of our social problems arise out of monopolies.